Let's go!
There's been an interesting comparison brought up that I want to talk about and review. And it's this video from Core A Gaming from a long time ago that even I think will have a different amount of perspective since then, so we can check it out. People sort of blame this video has done irreparable damage to fighting games. This caused the Tekken 8 patch. This caused the Dragon Ball patch. It's like, whoa, okay. I remember that video and it being a pretty nuanced take on balancing and overall like buffs and nerfs. What I want to do, and just to give them the benefit of the doubt, what if we watch it? What if we don't just look at the title and pull a conclusion? Why we should buff more often than nerf. Okay. And I remember this being kind of like an interesting take, but I haven't watched this on stream with anybody like ever. So, and it's been legit almost like 8-9 years since I've watched it. Let's just give Core A Gaming the benefit of the doubt. Let's just watch this take, because this is now the video that everybody is going to is the reason why fighting games are in the rough ass state. And I'm like, oh, how about let's just go take a look and figure it out.
Everyone. The man. In the lifespan of nearly every competitive game, there comes a player that's so dominant that they ruin it for everyone. The man who broke basketball...
Sonic Fox. Definitely Sonic Fox and their relationship with NRS. That is definitely true.
...was Lakers legend George Mikan. At 6 feet 10 inches, his unbeatable defensive strategy was to stand near the basket and stop any shot that was about to go in.
Yeah.
You might be surprised that there wasn't already a goaltending rule in place.
Not yet.
Before the 1940s, the thought of anybody able to reach high enough to goaltend was unfathomable. In fighting games, rule changes usually come in the form of nerfs and buffs. Anyone with a Twitter account following fighting gamers knows that having a fruitful conversation about character balance can be difficult.
Bro, and this is old Twitter. This is before you legit monetize people's outrage.
It's no surprise given how subjective and personal it is. It's hard to state your opinions on fairness without looking biased, and if you do it too much, you start looking like a crybaby. This is
appropriate
about the time
sound
when
effect.
someone steps in and says, adapt. Not only does adapt make for a badass t-shirt, it's a powerful attitude that shows how resilient you are in the face of any challenge. And that was precisely the attitude of the Fort Wayne Pistons when faced with Mikan and the Lakers. Their strategy against the most OP player in basketball was to make a quick lead early on and play keep away from the other team until the time ran out.
Damn. Yeah, we're not beating this guy at the hoop, so we have to win through a technicality. Legit zoning, yeah. Zoning discovered in the year 1948 or some shit like that.
It worked, and the Pistons beat the Lakers 19-18 in the lowest scoring game in NBA history.
Oh my God. That's crazy. 60 straight minutes of stalling.
Of course, this was only possible because there was no shot clock at the time, and as you might have
And so they introduced the shot clock, yep.
guessed, this is why they made one. In the end, the goal...
There was no shot clock, so there was no 24-second possession. They just timer scammed the shit out of the whole... If we can't beat this guy, let's beat him whatever way we can.
Goaltending rule nerfed Mikan, but the shot clock rule actually buffed him by making the teams have to deal with him.
Oh, damn. Interesting. Basketball balance is probably the video that I want to see more than anything right now.
Why would they make a rule that benefits Mikan? Because the ultimate goal of nerfing and buffing isn't to balance, but to make a game that's fun to play and watch.
So, since the history of this video being made, this is 2017, right? The obvious esportsification, he's not wrong. But I think as time has passed since the video, I think the way devs approach the balance of characters is absolutely more considerate nowadays, maybe than it was back in the mid 2010s-ish. Nowadays, I think they take a pretty deep look at some of this stuff. And yeah, for sure, they definitely take a big consideration of what's the most fun. We need to make our game a video game that is actually fun to play. They lean a bit more also into the competitive standard, the competitive aspect. In fact, it sort of bugs me when that's the case with some games and it's very obvious that they're not willing to take changes, get experimental. They're playing some of the game design super safe. Comes across as something that could be sort of apparent. To me, it's like, can you guys just like let it rock?
People wanted to watch him play basketball, not professional hot potato. I think focusing on balance too much can hurt a game in a similar way to how focusing on money too much can lead to an unhappier life.
That is another thing that we have talked about in the past, that like no fighting game is actually balanced, man. And the quality of a fighting game is not dictated by how balanced it is. The most precious fighting games of all time are not balanced. The ones that are looked upon as being the greatest fighting games ever are straight up unbalanced messes. Even the most beloved ones ever are just a literal myriad of horse shit that the majority of characters will have to deal with, and some will never have to worry about that shit, you know? However, the balance of a game isn't necessarily what makes it great. And I've always used this example. You know immediately the kind of person you're talking to if they're asking about fighting games and they come up to you and the person is like, hey, I'm really interested in this game. How balanced is it? You know what that tells me about that person? And I won't like say this to their face, but if somebody comes up, they ask you specifically, hey, I've been looking at this game, I wonder how balanced it is. I know that they are a super casual player. If their impression of what makes a quality game is that's balance, then I know that they actually don't have a lot of experience like playing those games at a relatively middle to high level. They're in it for what they perceive to be a thing that is like the bastion, which is like fighting games are only good because they're balanced, right? And it's like, no, fighting games are almost inherently unbalanced, right? They're almost designed to be unbalanced, that some characters will severely lose to others. So when they win, it's exciting. That's been our overall take on balance, where that doesn't mean that a game should be an unbalanced fucking mess. It means that prioritizing things like enjoyment and fun should be priority. But if the goal of like what is fun is just only to prevent the other person from playing, then that's fun just for one, not for the other. That inherently is pretty imbalanced, bro.
Business scholars call this medium maximization, which Raj Raghunathan describes as the propensity to forget all about the end goal one wants to achieve and to pursue instead the means or mediums to that end goal. Just like how money is worthless by itself because it's paper and metal, balance is also worthless by itself. Street Fighter 1 is the only Street Fighter to be perfectly balanced, but it's boring
because it's a mirror match. If you want a perfectly balanced fighting game, you play the exact same character your opponent's playing. That's all you gotta do.
Because you can only play as two characters who fight exactly the same. Obviously, this isn't the 5-5 utopia everyone's imagining, and it's because we want to see a diverse set of characters and movesets. Balance updates are ways to increase the frequency of underrepresented characters and reduce overrepresented ones, but there are different ways of going about this.
So yes, this is the normal process. What he's explaining right here, this is usually what we are talking about, where it's like, all right, so maybe the power levels are just a bit too high on some characters. Let's sort of like ease off on the annoying shit and try to like bring up some of the characters that might not have access to some of that fun. But you can't just like, you know, in the Tekken 8 situation, generalize it across the board and give it to everybody. There's a reason why Tekken 8 is the way it is. They almost unprioritized fun, in my opinion. They almost took the things that were unfun about the game and then tried to give it to everybody. To me, that was the antithesis of what this video is representing. The fun is finding the uniqueness of your character, not having every character just have that uniqueness now. So to me, this is a very different situation than what's happening now.
Underrepresented characters and reduce overrepresented ones, but there are different ways of going about this. One way is to buff the weak. Buffs are exciting and fun, and it's why we have Marvel. Buffs are so awesome, it kind of feels like a Faustian bargain that'll bite us in the ass later if we wish for...
This is what it's like to be an SNK fan. Buffs are a deal that will bite you in the ass longer if you wish for too much. Anybody keep up with KOF 15 or KOF 14? Every other month, it was like you have your flavor of the month character or characters that were just so goddamn good. And by the time you might come back to the game, that has now shifted. Instead of like trying to even shit out, it was almost like they just were taking the teeter-totter and going whoop, 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 whoop. And they did that like all the way until the end. It's like constantly.
Too much. But I thought about it, and the worst thing that can happen if everybody gets way too buffed is this.
It's Tekken 8 Season 2. Let's see how... Okay. Oof. Let's just let him say what he's about to say. Core Gaming from 9 years ago. Let's let you say what you're about to say, and we're gonna take it with a modern era of skepticism and see if this relates or translates to nowadays. Here we go.
This is a hacked version of Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition made by Hungshi Enterprise Taiwan.
All right. Okay, I think I see where he's going. Rainbow Edition technically inspired future versions of Street Fighter 2, a bootleg game, because a lot of people had so much fun with it. And it was bullshit, crazy ass game, right? But it legit inspired the future versions of Street Fighter to allow it to grow, right? To like how they would implement mechanics and shit. This is an old story. And where are you going with this, Core?
And it was called Street Fighter 2 Rainbow Edition. You've got homing fireballs, instant teleports,
It's complete horseshit.
unlimited air specials, shape-shifting, and yoga flames coming out of knees. Basically, every character got buffed to the point of absurdity, and while it's a pretty dumb game, it was kind of fun, and I remember dropping in some quarters to play it back in the day. Where else can you do hands Hadouken into jab teleport cross-up standing fierce?
And he has a point. It is kind of fun, but something being kind of fun is not really something that you want to put your time into. And I think that's like, broken games can be great, dude. They can be fun. You know, the first time you ever like hold a fidget spinner in your hand, I'm having a good time. Like your stupid primordial brain is being like, oh, this is doing it for me right now. It goes away in like 20 minutes. And then you never hold a fidget spinner ever again or have a desire to do that until the next goofy thing that has some weird brain tickle eventually does that shit.
The game might have been dumb, but it innovated many of the fighting game concepts we see today. Rainbow Edition was actually the catalyst that inspired Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting.
Was it that early? I thought it inspired some stuff in Super and beyond. Anyway.
Which also featured a faster speed, air specials, a teleport for Dalsum, a fireball for Chun-Li, and a sales figure of over 4 million copies on the SNES.
Bro, you can definitely tell. Hyper fighting lets you do jumping normal and cancel into Tatsu. It's crazy. That shit is still bonkers ass fucking wild to me. Whoa, what the hell are you allowing us to do? Like, this is crazy. It's actually the reason why most people like hyper fighting the most of the old school Street Fighters, because some of that shit is not present even in Super Turbo.
Yes, alone. The reason why Rainbow Edition was so interesting and influential wasn't because they just made everyone do more damage and move faster. It was because they gave the characters new abilities and new options.
Not wrong.
Now just imagine what it would be like if instead of Rainbow Edition, they made a hack called Gray Edition where everybody was nerfed to absurdity. No more specials, no more combos, no more throwing.
Yeah, to be a little critical, of course, take in this video, it's a bit extreme. I have a little bit of criticism here, but he's not wrong. Like that, nobody gives a shit about. We're watching something happen right now in real time in a community where suddenly everybody is going back because it got too extreme. This has happened to the Street Fighter community, to the Marvel community, to several different fighting game communities that I have been invested in or been a part of for many years. Most people just don't move forward. They actually stayed with their game and they enjoyed that game and they played the next one. They're like, yeah, you know what? This really ain't for me. I'm just going to stay with this. That almost is never the case with the Bandai Namco community outside of maybe a Soul Calibur, when Soul Calibur 3 was really rough. I'm saying this is the first time I have ever witnessed the Tekken community actually move backwards. And there's a lot of contributing factors behind that in the Tekken space. Netcode is a big one, dude. Your ability to even play some of these older games is much harder. If you want to actually get people matches on Tekken 6 and stuff, at least without emulation, that would have been really tough. Anyway, let's move forward. I don't want to interrupt this too much.
We've actually already played this game in 1984. It was called Karate Champ, and it's one of the most honest and balanced fighting games ever made. Nerfing is a good tool for balancing, but it's no secret people generally don't like it. Even Capcom has acknowledged this in a PowerPoint slide that's been floating around last year.
Yeah, the reason this slide became a meme chat is because they did the opposite. There were characters in the game like Alex. Anybody remember Alex? Most notorious one that could have used some help until it eventually took forever. My dude, like this was an issue in Street Fighter V. And they said one thing, when the balance patches eventually happened, they did the opposite. It was like, what the hell? The Alex trailer?
But why do we dislike nerfs so much, even if we understand it's meant to balance the game? Well, psychologically, humans and even apes are prone to what's known as loss aversion. Loss aversion is a theory that suggests that losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. For example, imagine I offer you to play a game of heads or tails where if it lands on tails, you lose $10. How much money would you have to win on heads for you to be willing to play this game?
I'll give him credit. He's right. Because of Fulgore. And now I think about going back and playing KI, and I want to play a different character. So you're not wrong.
Psychologists found that people would accept the challenge starting at $20 for winning, which is exactly twice the amount you could lose. This suggests that one nerf on your character will hurt twice as bad as one buff of similar caliber will feel good. The human tendency to be loss averse is used by marketing all the time. Why are sales of limited editions so effective? Because missing out hurts, which is why you gotta get that Strawberry Christmas Karen DLC before the season's over. While it can be argued that nerfing is a necessary evil to prevent the game from breaking, there are creative ways to do this that can improve the game instead of just making everyone depressed.
So this is a pretty nuanced take that you can approach like a game design and you can approach a balancing by making adjustments to characters that would actually enhance other aspects of the character. Just use a couple of really famous examples of when this is done well. Mortal Kombat 1 is currently going through this right now. I've talked about this before, okay? MK1 is in a much better state right now because their balancing as time has gone on has been pretty cool. And what they've done to the game is allowed it to actually grow and become something way more interesting than it was at launch. Let's go back to something that happened definitely way after this video came out. We can acknowledge that there's a point when you can take one of the most busted, fucked up things in Street Fighter V and actually balance it in a way that's genius and putting it into a spot where it still happens, but maybe not nearly as much and maybe a bit more haphazard, and it's his red fireball. He is the epitome of a buff nerf. He was nerfed, but he was also buffed. Other aspects of his game plan were legit made better, but they took away the consistency. He is the ultimate burf. The other game that did this around the same time was Killer Instinct, and it's the famous clip from Keats where they talked about nerfing wind kick and everybody else was asking about the healing. Buff, you have to nerf Jago's healing. Jago's healing is crazy. He's getting all this life back. Nerf the healing. Everyone was saying this and they nerfed wind kick. And people were like, what the fuck, you stupid assholes? This is crazy. Why would you nerf his wind kick? The devs came to the conclusion the reason that Jago was powerful was because his fireball was giving him a bunch of healing. It was the fact that Jago was weak nowhere. He had no weaknesses. Because he had no weaknesses, right? The combo breaker game was the only way out of that situation for him to get a hit or be controlling. He would just control everywhere. They made wind kick not nearly as good. And by that process, yeah, he became like still really good, but not nearly as oppressive. In the exact same way that Cora's explaining here, there are some really good examples since this video's creation that have gone into exactly what he's saying of like, it's possible to like birth characters.
One of the most hype-inducing changes I've seen was actually a nerf. During the life of Street Fighter IV, Ryu's Shoryuken was altered many times. Originally, you could cancel any version of the Shoryuken by sacrificing 2 bars of meter to make yourself safe in case
this is when they made FADC unsafe. Before, your wake-ups in Street Fighter, if you took an FADC wake-up, you were plus. And then in some season, either Ultra or Super or Arcade Edition, they made it so that FADC cancels on block were negative. It was not your turn again.
Opponent blocked. But after a few patches, they removed the ability to cancel the heavy version, which is the one that did the most damage.
I forgot about that.
While this seems like a bummer on the surface, it gave players the option to do a safe but weaker version, or a risky but damaging version. When you had the resources to cancel, but opted for the high damage version, you were telling your opponent that you're not scared and you figured them out.
Yeah, now it's an actual risk reward. All fighting games are made enjoyable because of risk reward like options in your head.
I mean, there's making a statement, and then there's just going ham. That is, what is he doing? I think he's going for the record.
This nerf was clever because it gave the player a new way to express themselves at the cost of some damage and safety. In contrast, if we look at Ryu's Shoryuken nerf for Season 2 of Street Fighter V, they just removed his ability to do a meterless invincible uppercut. They actually removed every move like this from the game, which caused some controversy.
This sucks because the history of Street Fighter is that you have, with some characters, it's part of their tool set, right? The threat of an invincible wake up, right? Does it lead to anything massive? In most cases, it didn't outside of Street Fighter 4. But in most cases, it was just a get off me tool. Hey, get the fuck off me. I want to make you think about what you're doing for a second. I can just dragon punch the shit out of you. This change universally sucked. It's actually the same in Street Fighter 6 for the most part, but at least in Street Fighter 6, you start with your meter. If you use all of your stocks, then yeah, you should absolutely have like your hand slapped in that situation. But this change in Street Fighter 5 was like one of the earliest changes of the game on a fundamental universal level that just sucked. This is also happening to Tekken 8 right now. Tekken 8 took out key charge, giving you a counter hit property. Some characters probably had really good key charge Oki, but removing a thing like an option presented for the whole game is not worth it. That never feels good, dude.
Predictably, the most common reaction to this was about balance. You often hear things like, welcome to what it's like to be Guile, or Ryu is dead. But what about its impact on the game's fun?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's less fun. You have a game that just has less options. My biggest criticism of Street Fighter V from the very first days of playing it was that we're just playing like a Street Fighter game with less stuff we can do. Like, wait a minute. Why are we limiting characters' basic tools, like the things that gave them identity, to V-trigger?
Fun. Did this nerf make the game more exciting? Did it make for more creative strategies? Did this allow the player to express themselves in new ways? It might have helped balance the game by making the characters more similar to each other, but as I mentioned before, balance is worthless by itself. Pro player Infiltration actually benefited from this nerf, but still disagreed with it because he felt it made the game less exciting.
무적 시간을 그렇게 조정한 거는 좀 스파 역사를 확 바꿔버리는 좀 개인적으로 마음에 안 드는 변경점이고.
If you look at updates to fighting games like your typical Supers, Ultras, and Ultimates, characters end up overall with more options and more abilities, not the other way around. With more characters...
Yes, go back, read this again.
If you look at updates to fighting games like your typical Supers, Ultras, and Ultimates, characters end up overall with more options and more abilities, not the other way around.
Yes, they're usually not going to take shit away. They're usually going to move the characters forward in some way to give them more options, to give them more abilities. It's the thing that has made most NRS games super sick. To me, that's fun. That is a fun aspect to grow naturally with the character over time.
With more characters and more mechanics, it starts to look like a nightmare for balance, but you also have more ways to solve problems. A hard matchup can seem more manageable if you can choose from more specials, ultras, or isms, and people like seeing their characters do cool new stuff. Because hard nerfing and taking away abilities can be so depressing and kill the excitement, I feel it should be reserved for extreme cases or creative nerfs that can actually make the game more enjoyable. Because hard nerfing and taking away abilities can be...
Nerfing, taking away things from characters, right? Yeah, big nerfs, taking away a whole bunch of shit can just be demoralizing in general, right?
So depressing and kill the excitement, I feel it should be reserved for extreme cases.
So in some of those situations when it is like really bad, if not like super oppressive or unfun, when it's removing fun from the game, okay, maybe we should take a look at that and change it in
creative nerfs that can act
in a creative way. This is what we were talking about, the Jago shit, what MK1 is going through, what Dan went through in Street Fighter V, those kind of things, you know? You know what is, I think, one of the best nerfs ever in fighting game history? It was to one of the best fighting game characters I've ever played. His name is Dante in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. The bitch had 6 pages of changes. They cut the dude's legs off. It was impossible for him to be nearly as good as he was before. There was no chance this character was going to be as oppressive and as brutally top tier. He was better than any friggin' character that had ever existed in Marvel, maybe going back to like Wolverine in the old games and shit. And they toned the shit down out of him. He's still the best character in the game. Anyway, let's move on.
Actually make the game more enjoyable. And even in games that don't get balance patches, the players will convene and make rules if things get really unbalanced anyways. Regardless, it turns out people still enjoyed Marvel 2 with its infinites and Melee with wobbling. The reality is, a broken game can still be fun, while a perfectly balanced game might not even be touched. Even as the target of nerfs by multiple
I could see how that... yeah, I can see how that take can be misconstrued a little bit nowadays.
And Melee with wobbling. The reality is, a broken game can still be fun, while a perfectly balanced game might not even be touched.
And yeah, that's another bit extreme. That's a bit of an extreme comparison for sure. But what he's saying is true. Inherently a quote-unquote balanced game. We're talking every single matchup. You want a balanced game, chat? Nothing goes over a 6-4. Probably as balanced as you're ever going to get for a fighting game. That isn't just mirror matches across the board. But there are no games that do that shit.
Even as the target of nerfs by multiple basketball leagues, George Mikan was a big proponent of a buff that players like him could never benefit from. He wanted basketball to have a 3-point line because it would give smaller players a chance to score and open up the defense to make the game more enjoyable for the fans. In 1979, the NBA added the 3-point line, and Mikan got exactly what he predicted.
Yeah, because it's true. Like you know that when you're the only one eating, that this isn't fun. Yeah.
Let me know in the comments how you think balance changes should be done, or if there shouldn't be any changes in the first place. This was Gerald from Korea Gaming.
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuance to the video. There's some extreme takes in there that aren't like that extreme. To say that like this video is what inspired Tekken 8 and Dragon Ball FighterZ, if you read the title alone, yes, that's true. If we're to look at this based on what he's saying, his idea is that nerfs should still exist for the interesting characters, but if you just nerf the most interesting character, then no, dude, that isn't a beneficial thing that benefits the game in general. Like removing a character's spirit and what makes them good. I think like the Dante change is one of the best changes I've ever seen in a fighting game at all. Because to change a character that much, they had a lot of consideration of not removing his legs completely, you know, of not just absolutely destroying that character when they could have. They could have nerfed him into the ground. Instead, they just made him the best instead of being absolutely god tier. What we're witnessing happening in the case of like Tekken and even like Dragon Ball FighterZ, which are the only two that I'm familiar with that have gone through some pretty extreme changes. Tekken and Dragon Ball just took several aspects of the game that might have been cumbersome or weird, or characters that might have had like weaknesses in some ways, and now we're just going to woof, well, let's just give everybody a chance to win at like all times. That was not ideal. That is not fun. And I think that's the antithesis of what Gerald is saying in this video, that balance should be a focus of fun. And finding and discovering cool stuff of your characters is what made Tekken 8 Season 1 fun. And getting to, you know, learn the habits of the player beyond all that powerful stuff is what I personally found to be the most fun. Breaking the barriers of like the blue ranks and shit, where I start actually playing the person and not the characters. Bamco seemingly went towards a direction that is unfun, that everybody was complaining about, even casuals alike. I don't know what casual looks at Tekken 8 and sees every character doing their crazy ass bullshit, realizing that you're gonna have to lab like it's a college semester in order to learn how to intricately sidestep and move around this shit, and look at that and go, isn't that fun? And to me, oh no, they were this close. You were this close, because making sidestepping way better than it ever was before was the answer. That was a creative, interesting way attacking what he says in this video, the really top tier aspect of the game. That was it, dude. You can make sidestepping better, and all of a sudden, bro, maybe we can move around all the crazy offensive shit laterally. This could be the game. But instead, there's a bunch of shit in the game that is anti-lateral movement. None of it makes sense. None of it lines up with anything that Gerald is almost promoting in this video as well. So that's all I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna say, I think there's some pretty interesting takes in here. Balance is not a one-trick pony situation to all fighting games in general. It's not. But approaching a fighting game and realizing what makes the characters, what makes the top tier characters fun, should everybody have access to that? That's like the situation where the top tiers are up here and everybody else is down here, and you just go up all the way more, right? And now the top is way up here. That's what Tekken 8 did. When I was using the example, tops are up here, everybody else is down here. You do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. The power level of the game goes down a little bit, but you give them new moves, you give them new abilities, like all that kind of shit. You think there's a road back for Tekken 8? I absolutely think there is, because it's only season 2. It might take a whole season for us to eventually get there, outside of like the really difficult and fucked up shit.